The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged peaks of the southwestern mountains, casting long, golden shadows over the land. The desert was waking slowly, birds chirped softly, and the wind whispered across the dry, dusty plains, carrying with it the scent of sage and earth warmed by the early morning sun. In a small Apache settlement nestled between the hills and the river that cut through the valley, the morning routine was beginning. Children laughed as they chased each other near the huts, and the sound of women pounding corn in wooden mortars filled the air. Life in the tribe had always been hard, but it had a rhythm that its people knew well. Among them was a young woman named Ahyoka. She was known for her gentle spirit and warm smile, the kind that could make even the hardest day seem a little brighter. Her long, dark hair shimmered in the sun as she moved, and her eyes, deep and dark, seemed to hold both wisdom and sadness. Recently, however, everything had changed. Ahyoka had fallen ill, and the illness had left her unable to walk. Her legs no longer carried her, and she had to rely on others to help her move. For a woman who had once been so lively, so full of energy, it was a cruel and lonely change. The tribe watched her with a mixture of pity and fear. Some whispered that she had been cursed or that her condition was a bad omen. In their eyes, a person who could not contribute to the tribe's survival might be seen as a burden. The elders, steeped in the old ways and customs, discussed her fate quietly. Their voices low but firm, they spoke of tradition and the tribe's need to protect itself. But in the heart of Ahyoka, it felt like betrayal. She overheard pieces of their conversation as she sat near the fire, her small hands trembling slightly as she held a bowl of water. Her heart pounded with fear, but she dared not speak out. She knew that the customs were older than anyone alive, and speaking against them could bring anger. That morning, a few men from the tribe came to take her to the river. Ahyoka's stomach tightened with dread. She had heard whispers of what awaited those who were cast out, but she had never imagined it would happen to her. She tried to plead, her voice quivering, but the men were firm. They lifted her gently but without hesitation, carrying her down the path that led to the river. Each step was heavy, not just with her weight, but with the weight of fear that pressed upon her chest. The river itself was wild and untamed. Its waters rushed swiftly over rocks, sparkling in the sunlight, but hiding dangerous currents beneath its surface. The sound of the river was deafening as they approached. Birds flew up from the riverbank in a sudden flurry, startled by the presence of people. The air smelled of wet earth and cold water. For Ahyoka, the sight of the river filled her with terror. She knew that once she entered those waters, she would be completely at the mercy of its power. The men paused at the edge, their faces solemn. One of the elders spoke, his voice echoing with authority, repeating the words that Ahyoka had dreaded hearing. According to the old customs, she could no longer remain with the tribe. Her paralysis made her a burden, and the river would take her away, cleansing the tribe of what they saw as misfortune. Tears welled in Ahyoka's eyes. She wanted to scream, to beg them to reconsider, but she could not. Her body would not allow her to run, and the men were too strong. As she was lowered toward the water, the cold mist from the river rose and touched her face. The first chill made her shiver violently. The current roared, and the rocks beneath the surface seemed to shift and threatened to pull her under before she even entered. Her heart pounded faster and faster as she realized that this was truly happening. The men set her down at the edge, and for a brief moment, she could see the river stretching out before her. Wild and endless, the sunlight danced on the waves, making it look almost beautiful. But she knew the beauty was dangerous. Ahyoka's mind raced. Memories of her childhood, her family, and the life she had known flashed before her eyes. She remembered running freely across the plains, climbing rocks, and laughing with her friends. She remembered the warmth of the sun on her face and the sound of the wind in the trees. And now, all of that seemed so far away, replaced by fear and uncertainty. But deep within her, a small flame of hope refused to die. She could not see how she would survive, but somehow, she wanted to. Somehow, she wanted to live. The men began to push her gently but firmly into the river. The cold water lapped at her feet and legs, sending a shock through her body. Panic gripped her chest, and she cried out, her voice swallowed by the roar of the water. She tried to lift her arms, to grab onto something solid. But there was nothing. The river was relentless. It pulled her in, faster than she could comprehend. She fought against it, kicking weakly with her paralyzed legs, but the current was too strong. Her small hands reached for anything, branches, rocks, even the air itself, but the river seemed to mock her attempts. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she was carried downstream. Her mind struggled to keep hold of her thoughts. She told herself to stay calm, to breathe, to survive. The river twisted and turned, carrying her over rocks that scraped her arms and shoulders. She was thrown into small whirlpools and tumbled over hidden stones. Each moment felt like an eternity. Her fear was overwhelming. But amidst it, a spark of determination burned. She refused to let the river take her without a fight. As she drifted further, exhausted and shivering, Ahioka began to notice shapes moving along the riverbank. The sun reflected off metal and leather, and a figure appeared. At first, she could not tell who it was. But something in the posture, the way the figure moved with purpose and confidence, made her heart flutter with a small glimmer of hope. Could it be that someone had seen her? Could it be that someone cared enough to help? The figure on the bank was a man, a cowboy, traveling through the rugged terrain. He had been riding nearby when he heard the commotion. The sight of a young woman struggling in the river made his heart leap. Without hesitation, he dismounted and ran to the water's edge. He could see her face, pale and terrified, her small hands reaching out for help. The river was dangerous, but he did not hesitate. With a powerful leap, he dove into the icy waters, cutting through the current toward her. Ahioka could hardly believe her eyes. The water continued to pull her under. But now, someone was fighting alongside her. The cowboy's strong arms reached for her, grasping her just as she felt herself being dragged under again. Relief and fear mixed in her chest, creating a whirlwind of emotions. She was alive. Someone had come to save her. As the river swept them both downstream, the cowboy fought against the current, keeping her above the water and moving toward the calmer banks. Every step was a struggle, every wave a new challenge. But he did not falter. He spoke to her gently, words she could barely hear over the roar of the water, reassuring her that she would be safe. And in that moment, amidst fear and uncertainty, a bond was quietly forming, one of trust, courage, and the unspoken understanding that human kindness could appear even in the darkest moments. By the time they reached the riverbank, both were soaked and exhausted, but Ahioka was alive. She shivered violently, her body numb from the cold. But she was no longer alone. The cowboy helped her onto the dry land, wrapping her in his coat as best he could. Her heart still pounded, but for the first time in hours, she felt a flicker of hope. The river had not taken her life. There was a chance now, a chance for survival, for safety, and perhaps for something more. As they rested by the river, the morning sun fully rising over the mountains, the world seemed to hold its breath. The roar of the river faded into a soft murmur, and the desert around them was quiet once more. Ahioka looked at the cowboy, gratitude and awe in her eyes. She did not yet know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She had been given a second chance, and she would not waste it. And so, in the quiet of the early morning, amidst the rugged beauty of the desert and the rushing river, a story of courage, hope, and human kindness began, one that would change the lives of both a paralyzed Apache woman and the cowboy who dared to dive into the river to save her. The morning air was crisp as the cowboy and Ahioka rested on the riverbank. The rush of the water behind them had calmed to a gentle murmur, but the memory of its strength still made Ahioka shiver. Her body was numb from the cold, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her. The cowboy, seeing her trembling, carefully wrapped his coat around her shoulders. It was rough and worn, but it offered warmth, and the small gesture brought a comfort she had not felt in days. He looked at her with a calm, steady gaze. There was no fear, only determination. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice carrying reassurance. Ahioka tried to nod, but her neck and shoulders ached too much, and her arms were too weak to hold the coat tightly around her. She could only stare at him, eyes wide with gratitude and disbelief. She had thought the river would end her life, yet here she was, alive, because of a man she had never met. The cowboy scanned the area. They were far from the settlement, and the river was wild and dangerous. If they stayed here, they might be seen by others from the tribe. Ahioka's heart tightened at the thought. Would they come looking for her? What would happen if they did? The cowboy must have sensed her fear, because he squeezed her shoulder gently. "Don't worry about them right now," he said. "We'll find a safe place." Ahioka nodded slowly, trusting him, though she still felt a flicker of fear. She had never been away from her tribe, and the world beyond her home felt vast and unknown. The cowboy helped her sit up and guided her gently to a flatter part of the bank, where the grass was thicker and softer. He used a blanket he carried in his bag to create a dry space for her to rest. The small fire he built crackled quietly, sending warmth into the chilly air. As she sat by the fire, Ahioka studied the cowboy. His face was weathered by the sun and wind, yet his eyes held kindness and patience. There was strength in his hands, the kind of strength that could tame a horse or lift a person out of danger. But it was not just physical strength that struck her, it was the courage to risk himself for a stranger. She wondered what had led him to this place. Why he had chosen to dive into a dangerous river when he could have stayed safe. The cowboy, noticing her gaze, gave a small smile. "Name's James," he said. "You can call me that." Ahioka tried to speak, her lips trembling. "Ahioka," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but the sound of her name in the air felt like a small claim of her identity, a reminder that she was more than her paralysis, more than what the river and the tribe had tried to take from her. James nodded. "Ahioka. It's a strong name. You're stronger than you think." He paused, studying her carefully. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere you can rest and heal." Ahioka's eyes widened slightly. Heal? She had thought her life was over, that she would be left to drift through whatever remained of her days. Yet this man spoke of hope, of recovery, as if it were possible. The first challenge was moving her. Ahioka could not stand, could not walk. James used the blanket to fashion a kind of makeshift stretcher, gently lifting her onto it with care. Each movement had to be slow, deliberate, to avoid causing her pain or injury. The riverbank was uneven, full of rocks and roots, and every step required concentration. Ahioka felt both fear and gratitude. Fear because the ground was treacherous, and gratitude because this stranger had not abandoned her. They moved carefully through the hills, following a path that James seemed to know. He had traveled these lands before, and he understood the signs of danger. Unstable ground, sudden cliffs, and the tracks of wild animals. Ahioka clung to the blanket with her hands, feeling the strength in his movements as he carried her. She thought about her tribe, about the cruel tradition that had thrown her into the river, and a small anger flared in her heart. Why had they not cared for her, for the life they had helped bring into the world? But James's presence reminded her that not all people were the same. There were still those who acted with kindness, who risked themselves for others. As they traveled, James spoke to her quietly, as if the sound of his voice could calm both their fears. He told her about the land, about the mountains and rivers, and about the small towns and settlements he had seen. He did not ask questions about her past or press her to speak, allowing her to rest and recover at her own pace. Ahioka listened, taking comfort in the rhythm of his voice. It reminded her of the stories her mother had told her as a child, stories meant to soothe and teach lessons about courage and hope. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The heat began to touch their backs, and James stopped at a small clearing near a grove of trees. Here, the ground was flat and soft, shaded from the sun, and they could rest. He laid her down carefully on the blanket, adjusting it to keep her comfortable. The small fire he built earlier continued to crackle, and he tended to it, ensuring it burned steadily. Ahioka felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. For the first time in what felt like days, she allowed herself to breathe fully, knowing that she was alive and safe. In the quiet of the clearing, James began to prepare a small meal. He cooked simple food, bread, some dried meat he carried, and fresh water from a nearby stream. Ahioka watched, fascinated by the skill and care he put into the task. Despite the dangers and difficulties, he remained calm and focused, making survival look almost easy. She realized then that there was much to learn from him, not just about survival, but about the way a person could face challenges with courage and compassion. After they ate, James sat beside her, watching her carefully. He noticed the small signs of fatigue and weakness, the way her muscles trembled, and he knew that recovery would be slow. "You're going to need rest," he said gently, "and later, we'll work on getting you moving again. You might not believe it now, but there are ways to adapt. You can still live a full life." Ahioka wanted to believe him, but the thought of moving her paralyzed body seemed impossible. Yet something in his voice made her consider that it might be possible. The afternoon passed, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The forest around them was alive with the sounds of wildlife, the chirping of birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and the distant howl of a coyote. Ahioka felt a sense of peace, a rare moment where fear and despair gave way to cautious hope. She looked at James and realized that she was not alone in the world. There were still people willing to risk themselves for others, still people who could offer safety and care when all seemed lost. That evening, James fashioned a small shelter using branches and cloth he carried in his pack. It was not much, but it would protect Ahioka from the chill of the night. She marveled at his ingenuity and the care he put into ensuring her comfort. As they settled down, she thought about the river, about the terror she had faced, and about the cruel customs that had cast her aside. But she also thought about James, about the courage and kindness he had shown, and a tiny spark of hope began to grow inside her. Night fell, and the stars emerged, sparkling in the clear desert sky. The river's roar had faded to a distant murmur, and the world seemed calm. Ahioka lay on the blanket, feeling the warmth of the small fire and the steady presence of James beside her. She could feel her heart slowing, her body relaxing for the first time since the morning. Sleep came slowly, but it came, bringing rest and relief. In the days that followed, James stayed by her side, helping her adapt to her condition. He showed her how to move using her arms and upper body, how to balance and shift weight safely, and how to use her surroundings to her advantage. Each small success brought a sense of triumph, and Ahioka began to see that life was not over. She could still learn, still grow, still experience moments of joy and freedom. Through it all, a quiet bond formed between them. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes a look, a gesture, or the simple act of being present was enough. Ahioka realized that courage and kindness could take many forms, and that the world, though dangerous, could also be filled with people willing to stand by her side. By the end of that first week, Ahioka had gained a small measure of independence. With James's help, she could move short distances using her arms, and she had begun to trust herself again. The river that had once threatened to end her life now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. And as the sun rose each day over the rugged mountains, Ahioka and James continued their journey together, learning, growing, and discovering that even in a world of hardships and danger, courage, compassion, and hope could light the way up the rocky plains and deserts around them. For Ahioka, life had begun to change in ways she never imagined. Though her legs still did not carry her, her arms had grown stronger, and with James's guidance, she had begun to move more confidently across flat surfaces. Every small success was a victory, and she felt a sense of pride that she had not known since before her illness. James proved to be patient and resourceful. He created makeshift tools to help Ahioka navigate the terrain and taught her ways to carry water, gather food, and even protect herself from small dangers. He spoke little of the outside world, but his words were always encouraging. "You're stronger than you know," he would say, helping her lift herself over a rock, or guiding her arms to balance her on uneven ground. At first, Ahioka had doubted him, but slowly she began to believe him. Each day she learned something new, and each day she discovered that even in her condition, she could still live a meaningful life. The bond between them grew quietly, strengthened by shared challenges and the necessity of trust. Ahioka learned to read James's expressions and gestures, understanding when he meant caution or when he meant encouragement. In return, James learned to read her signs of pain or fatigue, always ready to adjust his pace or offer assistance. Their partnership became a dance of mutual support and respect, a silent understanding that each needed the other to survive. Yet life in the wilderness was not without danger. One afternoon, as they traveled through a canyon, dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind picked up. James looked up at the sky, his brow furrowed. "A storm is coming," he said quietly. He quickly guided Ahioka to a small overhang in the rocks that could serve as temporary shelter. The first drops of rain fell, cold and heavy, and the wind howled through the canyon, carrying with it the sharp scent of wet earth and ozone. Ahioka shivered beneath the blanket James wrapped around her. The storm grew stronger, rain lashing against the rocks and riverbeds, turning the dry landscape into a treacherous, slippery terrain. The river, once distant, began to swell and roar, carrying debris along with it. Ahioka's heart raced as fear crept back. The river had already threatened her life once. The thought of it rising again filled her with dread. James, however, remained calm. He held her hand, reassuring her with a steady voice. "We'll be fine," he said. "The river is far enough away for now. Just stay calm and let the storm pass." His confidence was comforting, and Ahioka felt a small measure of relief. She realized that even in the face of danger, courage could appear not as a loud declaration, but as quiet, steady strength. When the storm finally subsided, the world looked transformed. The rain had washed the dust from the rocks and plains, leaving the air fresh and the colors of the earth vibrant. Puddles reflected the sky, and the river, now calmer, sparkled under the afternoon sun. James helped Ahioka move carefully, avoiding slippery rocks, and together they continued on their journey. The storm had tested them, but they had survived. And that shared experience strengthened their bond even further. As they traveled, Ahioka began to speak more about herself, sharing small pieces of her past. She told James about her family, about the traditions of her tribe, and about the life she had known before her illness. Though she did not dwell on the darker parts, she could not hide the sorrow and fear she had felt. James listened patiently, never interrupting, offering comfort simply by being present. In turn, he shared small stories of his travels, of towns he had seen, and of people he had met. These stories brought warmth to their long days, and Ahioka found herself smiling more often than she had in months. However, their journey was not without new challenges. One day, as they traveled along a ridge overlooking a wide valley, they spotted a group of men on horseback in the distance. At first, Ahioka thought they might be travelers like themselves. But as the figures grew closer, she noticed the expressions on their faces hard, suspicious, and watchful. James's hand tightened around hers instinctively. "We should be careful," he murmured. "It's best to stay hidden until we know who they are." They found a small cluster of bushes and rocks to conceal themselves. Ahioka's heart pounded as the men passed below, their horses kicking up dust and their voices carrying across the valley. She could feel James tense beside her, ready to act if needed. The men paused briefly, scanning the landscape, but after a tense moment, they continued on their way. Ahioka exhaled, relief flooding her. Even in a land as wild as this, danger could appear unexpectedly, and she understood now the importance of vigilance. Despite these fears, life continued in small, meaningful ways. James helped Ahioka create a small routine, one that allowed her to exercise her arms, practice moving safely, and even help gather food. She learned to identify edible plants, how to collect water from streams without contamination, and how to protect herself from small predators. Each lesson, each small accomplishment, brought a sense of independence and pride. Ahioka realized that though her legs did not carry her, her mind and spirit could still guide her to new strengths. One evening, as they rested by a small creek, Ahioka reflected on the journey so far. She thought about the river that had nearly claimed her life, the storm that had tested their courage, and the men on horseback who had reminded her that danger was never far away. Yet, despite all these hardships, she felt stronger, more alive, and more connected to the world than she had in months. She looked at James, grateful for his presence, and for the first time allowed herself to hope for a future beyond fear and survival. As night fell, they sat by the fire, listening to the soft sounds of the desert at night, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the distant howl of a coyote, and the gentle ripple of water in the nearby creek. James spoke quietly of the importance of resilience and courage, not just in surviving the wilderness, but in facing life itself. Ahioka listened intently, feeling a spark of determination within her. She wanted to live fully, to embrace whatever challenges came her way, and to honor the second chance she had been given. In the following days, Ahioka began to attempt more ambitious movements. With James's careful guidance, she practiced shifting her weight, using her arms to propel herself across uneven ground, and even navigating small slopes. Each attempt was exhausting, and there were moments of frustration, but she persisted. James's encouragement never wavered. "You can do it," he would say. "One step at a time. Every small movement is progress." Slowly, Ahioka began to see that independence, though limited, was within her reach. Their journey also deepened their bond in other ways. They shared moments of laughter, quiet reflection, and even small games to pass the time. James taught Ahioka how to identify animal tracks, how to find the safest paths through rocky terrain, and how to use her surroundings to her advantage. In return, Ahioka shared her knowledge of the land from her tribe's perspective, the herbs that could heal, the signs in the sky that predicted weather, and the ways to move quietly through the desert. They learned from each other, and in doing so, built a partnership based on respect, trust, and shared knowledge. Yet even as they grew stronger, danger lingered nearby. One morning, while crossing a narrow canyon path, a sudden rockslide forced them to take cover behind a large boulder. The noise was deafening, and Ahioka's heart raced. Dust and small stones tumbled around them, and the canyon seemed to shake. James shielded her with his body, protecting her from falling debris. When the rocks finally settled, both were shaken but unharmed. Ahioka realized that the wilderness demanded constant attention and courage, and she felt gratitude for James's steadfast presence. By the end of part 3 of their journey, Ahioka had transformed from a frightened, dependent young woman into someone who was learning to adapt, to survive, and to embrace the world despite its dangers. James remained her protector, teacher, and companion, guiding her through every challenge while allowing her to grow in strength and confidence. The river that had once threatened her life was now a distant memory, replaced by a landscape full of opportunities, challenges, and lessons. And so, as the sun set over the rugged desert, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Ahioka and James continued their journey together. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new hopes. And in the quiet of the wilderness, amidst danger and uncertainty, a story of courage, resilience, and human connection was unfolding, one that would shape both their lives forever. The days grew longer as the seasons began to shift. The sun rose early and painted the mountains and deserts with shades of gold and amber. Ahioka had traveled far from the river that had once threatened to take her life. Each step, or rather, each movement of her arms across the land had become easier, and her confidence had grown steadily. Though her legs still did not carry her, she had discovered new ways to navigate the world, and each small success brought a sense of triumph. James had remained patient, guiding her through every challenge, teaching her how to adapt, and showing her that life could still be full of purpose and adventure. He had fashioned wheels and supports to help her move more freely, and together They had crafted simple tools that allowed her to carry water, gather plants, and even help set up small shelters. The wilderness was still dangerous, but Ahioka now felt capable of meeting its challenges. She had learned to trust her instincts, to read the signs of the land, and to move with care and determination. One morning, as the sunlight spilled over a wide, open valley, James paused to let Ahioka take in the view. The land stretched out endlessly, dotted with cacti, shrubs, and rocky hills. A soft breeze rustled through the air, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth warmed by the sun. Ahioka's eyes sparkled with wonder. She had never seen the world in this way. The wilderness, which had once seemed unforgiving and harsh, now felt alive and full of possibility. James smiled as he watched her. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "You've learned more in these weeks than many people do in years." Ahioka looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I never thought I could do this," she admitted. "I never thought I could survive, or live like this." James shook his head. "You've always had the strength," he said. "I just helped you see it. There. I want reforndard. The last with problem with askri down. James of 7022 towns. I never thought I could survive." Their journey continued through forests, valleys, and canyons. They encountered wildlife, deer grazing near streams, rabbits darting through the underbrush, and birds singing in the trees. Ahioka learned to watch for signs of danger, the tracks of predators, sudden shifts in the weather, and the unstable paths that could lead to accidents. Each day was a lesson, and each lesson strengthened her body and her spirit. Despite the challenges, Ahioka's confidence and independence grew. She learned to move herself across gentle slopes, to use her arms to lift her body over obstacles, and to navigate tricky terrain with James only nearby to guide her. The sense of freedom she felt was unlike anything she had imagined. She realized that even with her disability, she could still experience life fully. She could explore, learn, and connect with the world in ways she had never thought possible. Their bond also deepened in ways that went beyond survival. They shared stories and dreams, laughed at small accidents, and marveled at the beauty of the land. Ahioka told James about the traditions of her tribe, the stories her mother had told her, and the songs she remembered from childhood. In return, James shared tales of his travels, of the towns and people he had met, and of the lessons he had learned from life on the open land. Each story brought them closer together, building trust, respect, and a quiet friendship that needed no words to be understood. Yet the world outside the wilderness still held challenges. One afternoon, while they were resting near a small stream, Ahioka spotted smoke rising from a distant ridge. Her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the sight immediately. Was it another group from her tribe, or travelers who might be dangerous? She felt a flicker of fear, the old fear that had haunted her since the river. James noticed her tension and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll stay hidden until we know," he said. "No need to rush. We can watch and wait." They observed quietly, hidden by bushes and rocks. Hours passed. The smoke turned out to be a small group of travelers passing through, friendly and unaware of Ahioka and James. Relief flooded her, but she realized that vigilance was a part of life. Danger might appear at any moment, but with patience, courage, and careful thinking, it could be met and overcome. Over the following weeks, Ahioka's progress accelerated. She learned to use small carts and supports that James had fashioned to move more efficiently across the land. She could carry firewood, collect water, and even climb small slopes with his guidance. Each day brought new challenges and new victories. The wilderness, which had once seemed cruel and unforgiving, had become a place of growth, learning, and freedom. Ahioka's heart also began to heal from the trauma of her tribe's rejection. She thought about the river, about the customs that had cast her aside, and about the fear and loneliness she had felt. Yet she no longer felt anger and despair as strongly as before. Instead, she realized that she had found something rare and valuable. Someone who had risked everything to save her, someone who had shown her that life was still worth living. James's courage, kindness, and unwavering presence had given her a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they set up camp near a quiet grove. The fire crackled, and the shadows of trees danced across their faces. Ahioka leaned against a log, watching the flames. "I never thought life could be like this," she said softly. "I thought it was over for me. But now I see possibilities." James nodded. "Life is full of possibilities," he said. "Sometimes it just takes a second chance to see them." Drak. In the days that followed, Ahioka and James continued to explore the wilderness. They discovered hidden valleys, quiet streams, and places untouched by humans. Ahioka's confidence grew, and with it, a sense of purpose. She began to dream of helping others who might face similar challenges. She imagined sharing the knowledge she had gained about adapting to disabilities, surviving in the wilderness, and finding courage in the face of adversity. Their journey was not without obstacles. They faced sudden storms, steep cliffs, and wild animals. But Ahioka's skills and courage, combined with James's experience, allowed them to overcome every challenge. Each obstacle became a lesson, and each lesson strengthened her independence and resilience. She realized that while she could not change the past, she could shape her future. And that knowledge gave her hope and determination. Over time, they came across small settlements and friendly travelers. Ahioka learned to communicate her needs, to navigate social interactions, and to find ways to be helpful and valued, even with her disability. The skills she had developed in the wilderness, resilience, observation, creativity, proved invaluable in connecting with others and finding her place in a wider world. She discovered that her life could still be full of purpose, joy, and connection. Through it all, the bond between Ahioka and James grew even stronger. They relied on each other, trusted each other, and shared in the beauty and hardships of the land. Ahioka realized that life had given her more than survival. It had given her a companion, a guide, and a friend who had taught her that courage and kindness could change everything. Finally, after months of travel, learning, and growth, Ahioka and James reached a quiet valley that felt like home. Surrounded by trees, with a clear stream running through it, the valley offered safety, resources, and peace. They set up a small camp, building shelters, planting simple gardens, and creating a life that allowed Ahioka to continue growing in independence. She could move freely with the aids and techniques she had learned, gather food, and even explore the valley on her own. Ahioka reflected on her journey, the river, the tribe, the storm, the dangers, and the victories. Each moment had shaped her, teaching her courage, resilience, and hope. She realized that her life had been transformed not just by James's bravery, but by her own determination to survive and thrive. She understood now that even in the face of rejection, disability, or fear, life could offer new beginnings, new opportunities, and new joys. As the sun set over the valley, casting long shadows and bathing the land in golden light, Ahioka looked at James with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving me, and for showing me that life is still worth living." James smiled. "You saved yourself too," he said. "I only helped you see what was already inside you." In the quiet of that valley, amidst the trees, the stream, and the mountains, Ahioka felt a sense of peace she had never known. The river that had once threatened to take her life was now a distant memory, replaced by a life full of possibilities, courage, and hope. She had faced the worst, survived, and grown stronger. And with James by her side, she knew that she could continue to meet life's challenges with resilience, determination, and heart. Her story had begun with fear, rejection, and despair, but it had ended with survival, growth, and the discovery of her own strength. Ahioka had learned that life could still be beautiful, even after hardship, and that the kindness of others, combined with one's own courage, could transform even the darkest moments into a new beginning. And so, in the golden light of the setting sun, Ahyoka and James settled into their new life. They faced the future together, stronger, wiser, and full of hope. Life was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace, filled with challenges, beauty, and the possibility of endless new beginnings.